Nice to meet you. The reason I have these calls is because I think right now there's so much interest in the AI doom debate. There's a lot of different perspectives, people who aren't necessarily super informed or have like super hardened opinions, which you said you are. Um, I just basically want people to hear different positions that you can have and where your position kind of butts up against my position, what we call the crux, and what it would take to change your mind or to change my mind. So at least we agree, like, okay, this is where the crux is. Um,
Hmm.
does that make sense?
Yep, makes sense. I think like from my point of view, like why I'm here is,
Yeah.
like you, I'm obviously interested in the conversation. I think it's, something that people are thinking about more and more. My objective is not really to convince you or your audience. Because I don't really think that these are things that can be like won over in a debate or an argument. I think there are certain things, certain axiomatic propositions that people have, like you might
Yeah.
have or I might have, and no amount of convincing will make us change our minds. So we're probably going to agree to disagree on some issues, but it's
Yeah, it's
still,
possible.
yeah, it still
It's
pays
po
to know what those are, so that if you're looking into things later, or you encounter new information, you kind of know where to socket that in terms of like the bigger debate.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's possible that we realize, I mean, axiomatic might just be if it's like, I'm like humanity is good and you're like, no, whatever wins the evolutionary arms race is good. Like we might reach an impasse on something like very fundamental like that. Or we
Yeah.
might just reach an impasse where it's like it seems like the risk that the AI labs will let AI run out of control is high, whereas that one might not be axiomatic. It's just a disagreement over, a prediction, right? Prediction disagreements are a different kind, right?
Well, that's true, but then we also have historical analogies where like we're probably going to cover nuclear some way because it's like it's the popular thing to compare against. But even in terms of in terms of the history of regulation around nuclear, specifically nuclear energy, I think we're going to find that might be an axiomatic proposition there, where I think we find that, okay, I mean we're going to go there, but like anyway, so I I think, okay, I'm going to start with a steel man first of your
Cool.
position,
Great.
okay? If that works.
Yeah.
Let's see like if I understand roughly like where you're coming from, or what your point of view might be.
Okay.
Um, I think from your point of view, um, and the whole like philosophy of like around what is intelligence, what is sentience, like that's like, that's a can of worms. But
Right.
that being what it is, um, from your point of view, the brain is basically a self-improving computer. Um, And
Uh-huh.
so with AI or AGI, it's a question of if only we have sufficient computing power and enough smart people working on it tirelessly,
Hmm.
it's only a matter of time until artificial intelligence reaches a precipice, after which it will gain AGI. It'll reach this singularity, it'll reach this stage of development where all of a sudden it just outcompetes, outthinks, outsmarts all of us in like a couple seconds, because it will go through like a million years of evolution in seconds, because it's got all this computing power that humans would take, through our generations and biology and all that. Like it would take us a long time. Like it would just outstrip us, and then poof, we're gone effectively.
I mean,
Like
that's a very extreme scenario of being able to
if,
self-improve in seconds, right? That's
well,
not
okay, yeah,
really.
but like, let's say weeks or year, even years compared to like us. We've taken hundreds of thousands of years, or if you
Yeah,
think of like
exactly.
intelligence,
Yeah, I
billions of
definitely,
years.
yeah, I definitely agree with that much, right? So my position does say that the amount of time that it took humans to evolve away from our ape ancestors and gain a huge IQ advantage, I do think that that should be able to be done in years, the same way that we're already seeing AI get much smarter within a few years.
Right. So, okay, so but my Steelman's kind of more or less mapping on to what you think.
Yeah, yeah, it's not far.
Okay. Um, so my position, and so this is the axiomatic one, where we are going to have an axiomatic difference of opinion or view, I think, is that the brain is not a computer, um, and that intelligence is more useful to be understood to be a tool that we use. So,
Hmm.
you can have a person who's not as intelligent, you can have people at different IQs, and but in a sense, like there's something there behind the intelligence that we consider to be human, and like, we're all the same and we all have the same, meaning and the same importance. Intelligence is something that we can use to differentiate people, but basically the intelligence, it's like it comes after the human experience. It's a tool. Um, you know, one of the arguments that made by, let's say, Carl Sagan back in the day, he was asked about, hey, what about cyborgs? And he said, well, all you have to do is replace a single neuron in the brain with silicon,
Hmm.
and then it's only a matter of degree until you replace every single neuron, and now you're a computer. It's only a matter of degree. And
Right.
so I guess it would be called the bioessentialist argument would be, okay, that's a great point. Wonderful. Replace the one neuron. And it's like, oh, shoot. Because just to kind of like illustrate that point. We talk about brain computer interfaces, brain machine interfaces. Like, there's all these different startups doing this stuff as well now. But when you zoom in, when you zoom into like what's actually happening when we use like something like a Utah array or anything like that, what we're doing is we are pushing basically a needle into the brain tissue, which acts as an antenna, and it's observing the ambient electrical activity of the neurons. It is not actually interfacing directly with a neuron. So
Hmm.
you know, despite like biotech popping up in the 1970s and our understanding of biology and mechanics and all of this stuff, like it's just insane what we've achieved in the last 50 years. Despite that, we are no closer today to integrating directly to neurons as we were 50 years ago. And so, okay, you might say, oh, well, that's biology and machines and you know, but I would posit that we have a similar issue when it comes to understanding or quantifying intelligence, that it's this feature of the brain and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's kind of like my first point. Like, that's to illustrate my basic starting point that,
Hmm.
to reiterate that the brain is not a computer, that actually the brain is, I didn't bring this up, but the brain is chaotic. It doesn't really obey linear computing paradigms. It doesn't really work in that sense. And so
Hmm.
I would suspect, or I would posit that the same would be true of a synthetic intelligence, that it would not work on this linear computing model that we're using currently, even though it's working way better than we think or we thought.
Okay. So
Hmm.
this view that you're describing, within the sphere that I usually read, tech Twitter, the EAC faction,
Yeah.
the AI labs, within this sphere, I think that your view is a minority view. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. But
Yeah. Is
in
there
fact,
is there a particular
hmm,
camp? Is there like a famous person who has a book that explains your view, or is it kind of just your own view?
um, not really this is not really a conversation that's typically had. I mean, it's more like this is conventional wisdom. So I could probably link, like for example, the brain chaos, yada yada. I could link you to a paper for that.
I
Um,
mean, you're saying it's conventional wisdom, right? But I think that, most
yes,
of the people who normally have discussions about AI doom kind of one of their starting beliefs is that the brain is a computer, right? So you're kind of
exactly.
getting off on an early exit in the doom discussion here.
Well, exactly. No, no, but like as I said, that's an axiomatic proposition, and we're gonna disagree on that. It's like agree to disagree. But there's a lot more we
Yeah,
can
but
talk
I
about
mean,
than
it's not
you know.
axiomatic, right? I mean, I'm happy to talk about it with you, but I'm framing, right? I'm just zooming out and
Yeah,
saying,
sure.
okay, so you're getting off. I mean, normally I have like 10 steps that I want to walk you through toward doom. One of the very earliest steps that we usually don't spend time on is like, yes, the brain is a computer, but you're like, I want to get off here, and that's fine. I just want to put it
No,
in
we don't have to. We
context.
don't have to get out. We don't have to get off here. We can talk through this if you like.
Well, but if the
Like
brain,
why
I
it.
mean, if the brain's not even a computer, I don't think there's a point in talking about other stuff like, instrumental convergence, like these kind of things kind of assume that we're running algorithms, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, but I mean, yeah. I mean that's true. Like in a way, there's not a whole lot to talk about here because it's like, okay, the brain's not a computer, end of discussion. But at the same time, algorithms and things like this are still useful ways to understand the brain. So it's not that I'm saying that AI will never happen, AGI will never happen. It's just, I'm trying to illustrate that we don't necessarily, when we're talking about intelligence, where we're talking about these kinds of things about like, an AI manifesting as AGI and doing all these things, we are assuming a lot of things about intelligence that are not necessarily clear cut. And so it might just be useful for people to know that the jury is out on some
Yeah.
of these questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's probably a good focus for like the next 20 minutes where we just kind of explore because I do think like I said, I think you're in the minority, at least among people that I talk to, But I do
Absolutely.
think that you have your own camp. Like I don't think you're the only one in the world who thinks this. So I think it's useful to just have a discussion about like,
I would put it like this. I th a lot of people dismiss the risk of AI and AGI out of hand. Like I think if you talk to normal people, they're gonna, like I called you a loony. Um, I think if you ask like the normal average person on the street who, maybe has heard of AI, has watched some sci-fi movies, you know, maybe they've even like their kid has brought like an app to them and said, "Hey, this is ChatGPT, try it." And so, wow, this is very interesting. These kinds of people, you talk to them about AGI, they're gonna say like, "Well, I don't see how that's possible." So a lot of I think most people, like let's say 90% of people who are not in the tech Twitter, who are not part of this conversation,
mhm.
dismiss it outright out of hand. And I think my role in this conversation is to kind of elucidate, like, hey, they're dismissing it out of hand, but that doesn't mean that it's arbitrary, that there are these
Yeah,
nested
yeah. Well,
assumptions that
hold on.
people make.
I think that's not
Hmm.
factually accurate about what the average
Okay.
person would say. I think the average person, based on what surveys show, if you bring up, hey, you see how AIs keep getting better, one day they're actually going to get smarter than humanity, potentially even in the next few years or decades.
Hmm.
And a lot of people think that's dangerous. The average reaction, once you take a few minutes to explain, is like, yeah, that sounds scary. That sounds like a real risk.
Right, but that's after 2 minutes of qualifying the statement.
I mean, after 10, I think even after 10 seconds where they barely are getting context, I think that'll still be a pretty typical reaction.
Right, but then the issue might be that you're telling people effectively like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. Here's what I'm saying to you. What do you think about what I'm saying? As opposed to what do you think about AI?
Okay, I mean the line of argument we're going down is just I mean you're just saying
Okay,
like
sure.
hey you're acting like you're coming from a position where you are going to explain to me what the average person thinks and I just think you're more like explaining what a few percent of people think, which is fine, right? But I just don't think you're in
Hmm.
the majority.
Okay, let me qualify this way then. People who dismiss AGI out of hand are probably basing their assumptions on what I think I'm going to be bringing up. One of them being the brain, not computer thing. I mean, these are assumptions. We don't know if they're testable or true or, empirical, but these are attitudes that people might have. And it
Yeah,
might be
yeah. All
useful
right,
to
all
know
right.
like what kind of like rough they're like kind of like roughly what they're based on, that they're not just here's a person who's like anti-tech and doesn't believe in AI. It's like, hey, there might be something here.
Okay, well, let's get into the meat of what do you think is going on in the human brain, right? So, like, I mean,
Sure.
humans, like, well, maybe I'll pose the question this way. So imagine that you have a tribe of humans that have grown up in a warm environment, and suddenly they're in an ice age, and it's very cold. So they figure out how to build shelters, like it's the
Hmm.
the snow, and they somehow build an igloo, and then the igloo keeps them warm, and they survive in this new niche. So
Sure.
and they didn't really evolve to do it, right? Like natural selection didn't really weed them out. They just the same generation pulled it off, right? Whereas
Hmm.
all the other animals that were adapted for the warm climate, they couldn't pull it off, right? So how do you explain that fact?
I would go with an analogy of language. So there's a language called Creole. It's spoken in the Caribbean or Caribbean. There's many forms of Creole. Specifically, one form was studied, I believe, in the 1980s. It was Dutch Creole, and the way that that Dutch Creole as a language came about is you had slaves of various different cultures and language backgrounds, and they were owned, or they were in plantations owned by the Dutch. And so you had all these different language groups. They had nothing in common, and they gained freedom. What language do they speak? And so the only commonality they had was Dutch. So they used Dutch as a kind of, like a skeleton language, and they started speaking it. But the issue is that all the slaves were adults, and so they couldn't really speak this new made-up language very fluently. Yet their children, immediately the next generation was able to fill in the blanks, and next thing you know, we have a fully fledged, completely developed language.
Hmm.
So to
Yeah, I'm
answer,
familiar.
to go with the analogy,
This is
yeah, yeah,
covered in The Language Instinct by Steven Pinker.
exactly. Right. So, but there the point is, um, these people who started building igloos, the first generation of igloo builders probably didn't do very well, but their children would have been masters at it. So this is to suggest that humans have this kind of innate learning ability, that you don't need to evolve igloo making. You already
Hmm.
have the ability to build shelter. You're just using like, hey, I'm sheltering from the rain or the sun or the wind, and I'm applying this to the cold and the snow and the sleet.
Right. So humans could pull that off, right?
Hmm.
And other animals couldn't, right? So humans
Right.
have a learning ability. And so, I mean, one thing I wanted to get to is just like, you don't think that the brain is a computer. So do you think that the way a human brain learns just can't be explained by a way that anything running on a computer could also learn? There's some lower level difference?
No, I don't think that. I think the human brain, its functions will eventually be modeled in computers. I don't, I think that's
Okay,
obvious.
so wait, can it be perfectly modeled by, or sorry, not perfectly, but like, to a high enough accuracy that you don't start introducing, major weaknesses, right? Can you model a human sufficiently well the same way that an airline company, when they're making an airplane manufacturer, when they're making a new airplane design, they simulate it, and the simulator is not perfect, but it actually does in practice tell them that the airplane is going to fly. Can we do that with a computer modeling a human brain and have it actually think?
Well, okay, two things. First of all, we can't do that now. What we can do right now is simulate the brain, but that's not the same thing as recreating its, core functions. So
Yeah,
like
that's
I
that's
think
totally fine. Yeah, but is the
yeah, okay,
simulation
but no,
just
no, no,
good
but
enough that it gets the thinking done?
yeah, but there's two parts to this, right? The first one is currently we can't, and the second part is eventually we can, but
Okay.
I'm not, eventually we can, but I would think that we're going to understand the brain's processes and we're going to create a version of that on the computer, and it will be its own thing. It won't be the brain. It'll be its
Okay,
own
it'll
kind
it'll
of
be its own
intelligence.
thing, but it
Yeah.
will perform thinking, and the thinking will be
Yes.
comparable to the thinking that a human brain performs.
Yes. I would agree
Okay,
that. They
okay.
would
So
not be the
you're really
same,
big on saying that
but
the
near
brain's
enough.
not a computer, but
Hmm.
your position is also that a computer could just do the job of a brain, do the thinking of a brain. So it just seems like the extra detail where you're saying, but the brain's not a computer. It just seems like that's not a very relevant detail to predicting the future, right? Because you're just admitting that a computer could just do the whole work of a brain.
Right. But I'm saying that the brain is not a computer, but that we will have knowledge and understanding, which allows us to recreate the same kinds of functions in a more discrete computer format. But they're
So
not
I'm
the
I'm
same
not even
thing.
sure if your model is
Okay.
different from my world model, right? Because it's kind of like
Hmm.
saying like, look, when a computer plays against a human at chess, it's not really playing chess. It's just
Right.
saying which move it wants to make by using different processes, but the human is the only one playing real chess. I feel like that's the kind of point you're making.
I mean, to a degree, yes. I mean, to
Okay,
a
I
degree,
mean
I
it
would
just
agree
seems
that
like
that is
that
true.
distinction is just not helpful. Like it just doesn't really add predictive power.
Right. But yeah.
Okay, but
Yeah,
you're
I
you're
agree.
you're so you're
Sure.
agreeing with me that that the chess is saying, okay, so it's kind of like computers aren't thinking for real, but their thoughts tell you what moves to make to outmaneuver people. Like you see what
It's
I'm saying?
more
Like,
I think it's like isn't the classical idea or the argument from this point of view that the computer has, the system has been taught, it's been shown millions and millions and millions of games, and so as the human makes moves, the computer responds, and it's trying to map on to the game in its library that it won, or where if
that
it's
that's
white,
that's
white
one
won.
naive that's one description of one algorithm that a chess playing computer
Yes,
might use. There's a lot of other details and a lot of other algorithms that could be involved too.
sure. No, but like that's like one way of formalizing that.
So but now you've added something new to this latest point where you're starting to talk about the algorithms within the computation, but before we were just talking about the whole idea of being a computation, right? And we were talking about a neuron for neuron simulation, which means it would be running the same algorithm,
Right.
right? And now you're kind of shifting the
Hmm.
discussion to be like, but computers use different algorithms and the computer algorithms are more simplistic.
No,
So we're kind of getting
I
onto a
would
new
say
point.
I would say that again, the brain is a chaotic system. It doesn't follow the rules of linear computation. It doesn't really map on very well to computers. That being true, we
Okay,
can
but if
still
a computer
discuss.
were but a
Hmm?
computer could do a neuron for neuron simulation and still be accurate, not perfect, but accurate at getting the
No,
same
but like
thinking done, correct?
no, neural networks are not simulations of the brain. They're just
No, no,
using
not
this.
on your not a neural network, but hypothetically
Okay.
a neuron for neuron simulation.
I just don't agree that a simulation is the same thing as the real thing.
Yeah, it's not the same thing, but the claim that I thought you confirmed is you think that even though it's not the real thing, it would still be outputting similar thoughts.
I think if you simulate brain activity, that doesn't necessarily allow you to predict what the brain's actually doing because our
Okay, then
understanding
I
of.
think I
Hmm?
misunderstood your position then, right?
Okay.
Or sorry. Now you just said understand what the brain's doing. Let's forget about understand what the brain's doing. Just
Hmm.
use a computer to do a neuron by neuron simulation to get a similar input-output behavior, right? Where you ask it the same question you could ask a human, and you get the same quality of answer that you would have gotten from the human, but instead of neurons, it's simulated neurons, right? So you admit that this hypothetical system is allowed to exist.
I agree. This hypothetical system is
Okay.
allowed to exist. My issue is that the current systems are not doing this.
Okay. So it's just, I think I don't want to beat a dead horse, right? But it just seems like
Sure.
when you say the brain's not a computer, but you also allow that we can have a neuron for neuron simulation running on a computer where the black box, there's basically no way to tell when you input to the black box and then you take the output from the black box, like the answer to a question. There's no way to tell if the thing inside the black box is a human brain or a neuron for neuron computer simulation of a human brain, right? So you're with me so far.
Sure. I would qualify that by saying that if you have two black boxes and both of them make a mistake, you can tell which one's a human by asking it, hey, you made a mistake here. Why did you make this mistake?
But if the inside of the black box contains a neuron for neuron simulation of a human brain, don't you think that
Hmm.
those simulated neurons are also going to reflect back on the mistake?
I'm not sure. Let's put a cap on that
Okay.
and say we don't
So
know.
it just seems like, but based on what you just said a few seconds ago, when I said, yeah, the black box has the same input output, I'm surprised that now you're saying, you know what? It's not a black box because something about the simulation fails on certain questions, right? So you're
No, no,
kind of
it
making
is
a
still
different.
it is still a black box. So when you say black box, I instinctively go to the concept of fuzzy logic in AI in general, where we don't necessarily know what, I mean, the AIs currently are effectively a kind of black box. We have the neural networks, we have deep learning, we have all these things, we understand the rule sets, we can use reinforcement learning, we can do all of these things. But when you have an AI version that's, feature complete and you're giving it inputs, telling it to do something, and then you have outputs, when it makes mistakes, we don't get to like correct, like,
Yeah,
hey, you made a mistake here.
I
We
just want
have
to
to
point out
like, yeah.
you're not addressing what I'm talking. Again, because the word black box, you've
Hmm.
kind of you've brought in a different concept that also involves black boxes, but it's kind of
Yes.
different.
Yes.
I'm actually not saying anything about current AIs yet. I'm still
Okay.
beating this dead horse on
Okay.
and I'm not even arguing with you, by the way. I'm actually just everything I've been doing right now is actually just trying to nail down what your position is. This is a
Sure.
clarifying Mikael's position part of the conversation.
Fair enough.
Okay, so
Okay.
originally you were big on telling me that the brain's not a computer. And then I asked
Yes.
you if we were to make a neuron by neuron simulation on a computer of the brain, would that then think similar to the brain thinks? And I thought you said yes, but then now it seems like you're actually saying no.
I'm saying that in your analogy, yes. But I'm also saying that if your analogy were to occur, the system that that simulation would be running on would probably not be a computer in our current understanding of what a computer is or is not.
Yeah, that's fair that you're still claiming it's not a computer, but just to make sure I heard you correctly. So a neuron for neuron simulation, if we were to put a box around it of whatever color, right? And the
Sure.
thing inside the box is either a human brain or a neuron by neuron simulation of that same brain. And we feed it an input like a question, and then an answer
Hmm.
comes out.
Hmm.
Um, is your claim that it would be distinguishable because you're just not going to be able to build the same kind of thinker out of simulated
No,
neurons,
my
or that you
my
can build the same kind of thinker out of simulated neurons?
you can I do believe you can build a similar kind of reasoning system. Like you can have
Okay.
basically the human brain in a synthetic
Yeah, to the
format.
point of being indistinguishable, or
Yeah. I mean
okay.
to the point that if we allow for, for this system to really still have the same kind of capabilities that contemporary AIs have, which is massive, insane data sets, assuming that this brain that we now built can do those things, yeah, that would be dangerous, I think.
Sorry, hold on. But now, okay, I know you're rushing ahead
Okay.
to the whole doom argument, but I'm still
Hmm.
I just can't get over the fact that you're claiming that the human brain is not a computer, but you're happy to say that a neuron for neuron simulation running on a computer will do indistinguishable thinking compared to a brain.
I mean, this is going to be like pedantic and we're going to be splitting hairs here, but again, whatever the architecture that that brain would be running on, it would not be something that we would today classify or qualify as a computer. When I say computer,
Okay.
I'm specifically
But it could
referring
have
to linear
silicon
computing.
chips. It could have, well, hold on a second. It could have silicon chips
Hmm.
and it could be running Python code, right? Because the simulated neurons would still be like a Python program on a computer chip that exists today, right? So it'd be a standard von Neumann architecture running neuron for neuron simulation algorithms, correct?
I'm not sure. I don't know if it would be a von Neumann system or if we'd have to
Okay,
invent a
okay.
completely new
So
kind of
when
thing.
you're imagining simulated neurons, it seems like you're maybe we had a different picture
Hmm.
of what question I was asking, right? Because the question I was asking is that the simulated neurons are Python programs on Pentium chip or whatever, and an M3 chip. Whereas you're
Hmm.
saying, the simulated neurons are actually quantum chips. It's like, whoa, 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 okay, so we have a different definition of what I was even asking.
I think okay, like quantum, I'm not sure about that. But I would say that we would need some kind of new kind of architecture. And
Okay, so now I have to ask the hypothetical again. Like I'm sorry, I gotta insist
hmm
on just
hmm
clarifying your original claim. So imagine that we scanned a human brain and
okay.
we had close models of the input and output of every neuron. And then we used that model to construct a big Python program that had sections of the code, right, or sections of data matrices or whatever that just modeled every neuron in code on a classical computer, right, to
hmm
simulate the same input-output behavior of every neuron. And then we chained together all the different neurons, we connected them together inside the computer's memory, right, but it's still a classical computer. And so what you're having is I'm just describing the standard conception of a computer simulation, neuron for neuron, of a brain, right? So such a
Right.
structure, a computer simulation of a brain, we run it, right? It starts answering questions in your mind. Can you imagine that such a system would give indistinguishable type of answers as if it's that human thinking?
Yes, but when you're qualifying it so far with Python programs and conventional chips and technology that we today have, I would say, yeah, that's a great simulation, but that's not thinking. It
Okay, so
doesn't,
and just to rate, you say that's not thinking, but you really have no way to tell until you open the box, right? There's nothing standing outside the box that would tip you off that it's not really thinking because it does a very convincing impression so that you literally can't test it at all because it's so indistinguishable.
in this hypothetical, yes, but I
Okay,
suspect that if this hypothetical were to occur, we would very quickly discover ways to tell.
like
We'd
what?
find out, yeah, well, we'd find out where it breaks. We'd find out, these exceptions to the rule set where all of a sudden it cannot respond in a cohesive way. It could be for all sorts of reasons. It could be reasons to do with the architecture chosen, or it could be something like, hey, this company that built it, they have these idiotic rules on swearing where the AI is not allowed to swear. I mean, in the wild, you'd be finding these kinds of edge
Well,
cases.
now you're mixing in a company imposing rules on swearing, but this isn't, I'm not even talking about companies today. I'm just talking about a neuron by neuron simulation.
I know, but I'm talking about like how those systems will be built.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so I think that's good for that section, and I know we don't have much time.
Sure.
We're only gonna go for like 10 more minutes, but so let's talk about Doom now. So it's interesting. I mean, so it sounds like you are allowing for computers to do a lot relative to what the brain can
Yes.
do, even if it's not the real thing. Okay. So I guess let me just lob the very rough sketch of the Doom argument at you, right? Which is just that like the human brain it can think, but like a computer, if you give it a lot more resources, it can potentially become more powerful computationally and also
hmm
run algorithms that help it think better and faster than a human. And suddenly you've just got basically a smarter species, right? Except it's living inside computers and it's very fast. Like you can basically there's more headroom above the level of human intelligence, and computers might soon occupy that headroom. What do you think of that argument?
Sure. But my issue with that would be that, again, I mean, we don't have to go back to the dead horse now, but I would point out that without agency or desire or drive,
Mhm.
it's just an inert computer.
Okay, but
Even
if it
if
were
it's
to
got a,
simulate
yeah.
neuron, okay, so I should clarify. A
hmm
black box that's simulating a human brain neuron for neuron that is convincingly outputting the same responses, would that black box then also have agency?
No, because if you
Okay.
image, no, 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 because if you take a human, a real human, and you compare the brain activity between somebody who's comatose, but like has REM sleep,
Uh-huh.
and somebody who is perfectly healthy, you're gonna have a very difficult time telling like, oh, this person is like brain dead. They're not brain dead.
Okay, so
There's
just to
still
flesh out
activity.
the scenario, right? So let's say
hmm
you take Elon Musk's brain. Now you've got a black box computer saying Elon Musk's brain. And Elon Musk's brain is saying like, "Hey, I'm going to start a company." And say we just let it. We let it interact with humans, right? So now it's barking orders to human servants that are working for it, and it's saying, "Guys, we're going to Mars," because after all, it is a simulation of Elon Musk's brain. So doesn't it seem to display agency? Isn't it causing things to happen in the world?
I just don't see how that would be possible. I'm sorry. Like I do not see.
So which
I
part?
j- I,
Imagine
I
we
do
say,
not.
Elon, what would you like us to do? And he says, the next thing you need to do is you need to send me the plans for this engine, and then they do it. So just where are you seeing where does this not make sense?
I just don't see how you leap from simulation of the brain to agency. I don't know if that's something
Okay,
that
so,
can
so I'm
actually
telling you
be
how,
done.
right? Because you're already accepting that it's possible that this black box could be a good input-output simulation. So when you input to Elon, what should I do, boss? The output would probably be something like, show me the engine design, build the engine, right? So aren't by virtue of having these outputs and causing these designs to get built, isn't that agency?
No, because Elon is known to be driven by his own drives. He's not really somebody you go and like prompt
Right.
him like, "Hey, what should
Okay.
we do next, boss?"
Well, I understand, but when okay, so imagine the input is just nothing, like, hey Elon, how's it going? Hey there, now we need to go to Mars, right? Like that would be like, remember, you're granting the assumption that the thing inside the black box is neuron for neuron thinking as an Elon, right? Or thinking
But that's
convincingly.
yes, but that's nested in the argument that first we need completely new kinds of architecture to be able to run these kinds of programs, and they're not going to be running on computers that we have currently. The technology is not there yet.
Okay, so it sounds like the original question I asked you is like, do you think that there's headroom above human intelligence? And then you started being like, well, they're not going to have agency. And now it sounds like you're kind of saying like, okay, they could have agency, but we're just the actual AIs we're building now is just so different from the kind of scenario where you're doing a neuron for neuron
Well, I
simulation.
think I've been consistent with that all along. I repeatedly said, hey, the what we're doing currently, contemporarily, cannot go there. And the kinds of hypotheticals that you're bringing up will require completely new kinds of technology that we don't yet have, and understanding of brain function that we don't yet possess. I think I've been
Okay.
consistent on that point.
Okay, so you're
And
saying so the bottleneck isn't
yeah,
what computers can do; it's what the current direction that tech research is heading is kind of a dead end. But maybe we'll backtrack and we'll go another direction, and then there will be a dangerous scenario.
well, I'll give you just one example, just an analogy, right? So IBM made this chip that does extremely good AI simulations, and it's like very, very good and efficient, more energy efficient, yada yada yada. And they called it, they were kind of modeling it after human brain anatomy, and they called it a neuromorphic chip.
Mhm.
Now, that's just more efficient. Who cares? But my assumption would be that for us to make these kinds of thinking machines that are doing the kinds of things that you're calling for, having agency, doing these kinds of things, they will require way, way more incremental effort on these kinds of things of figuring out what are the best possible ways, and just new architecture, new ways of doing things. And we're not necessarily going to do it with current technology. I think that's like my central position here.
Okay,
Like, I'm
so
granting all of these, like, is it possible that computers could do this, or whatever we'd be calling them? Yes, but the current technology and current understanding isn't there yet.
okay, now when you look at current AIs, you're thinking,
Sure.
this is just a dead end branch of the tree. This is so far from the kind of AI that could ever become smarter than human. And why do you think you know that?
Well, I think we look back at history, the last 50 or so years of AI development of 10-year cycles and winters. And I think if we look at what's been achieved, the greatest benefits seem to be, to do with scale. We just have a lot of data, and we have extremely cheap servers and all the rest of it. Um, I think that's the big game changer, not really so much um like progress in AI per se. It's just we're reaching, I think, the limits of what huge databases and big data and all these things can
I mean,
achieve.
you're making a reference to human history, like, moments in human history where we got a lot of power or a lot of useful mileage out of some innovation. And you're saying there's a pattern where such innovations are kind of like economies of scale in character. Am I understanding your point?
Well, specifically with AI, I would say that the last 10 years of AI development has been mostly to do with scale, like, chain of
Yeah,
thought
okay,
and so on.
the last 10 years,
Yes,
but if we zoom out, right? I mean, I think about moments like the time Newton sat down and invented calculus and invented Newtonian physics. Like that was like a very high
sure.
leverage moment, right? And that
Yes.
doesn't have that flavor of like, oh, we scaled something up. It's more like we used intelligence to think and then output something that is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, sure. But we don't have to go to Newton. We can just look at the last 70 years of AI development and kind of like milestone that, like, hey, how far have we come in 70 years,
Hmm.
and why? And I think a lot of the reasons for why is our, mastery of computers. It's generating data and just doing all of these things more so than our fundamental understanding of, cognition, or, how to model intelligence.
Yeah, so you can say, hey, the entire story of AI up to this point has largely been intertwined with scale. And I think that's fine. That is a good description of at least training, and I guess maybe inference, like having a lot of parameters helps you with inference. Like I think that's fine to say scale has a lot to do with AI progress. But in terms of just like where power comes from, right? There's this other thing, like the AI doesn't just have scale. Like it has the ability to solve a certain type of problem, like you can call it a planning problem, right? It seems like
Hmm.
that particular skill, right, where the input is get the world to some state and the output is like a strategy or a plan, right? That particular skill, similar to playing chess, it seems like that's kind of the core of how an agent can be powerful in the world, right? By having that
Hmm.
skill.
Hmm.
Um, and it
Right.
seems
Well,
like scale isn't the entire answer to the story, right?
no, it's
There's
not the
another
entire
a
answer.
parallel story of just like agents getting better at achieving goals.
Well, yeah, no, it's not the entire answer, obviously, but I would just, you know, I'd be interested to see like a milestone of AI development over the last 70 years and kind of see like what's the progress like? Is it linear? Is it cumulative? Is it exponential? And maybe if it's like, if it was clear, I mean, okay, I'll put it as like this, right? I think one of the important things about having honest conversation is like, hey, here's what would ha need to happen for me to change my mind. If I saw something like, the last 70 years of AI development, and here's the milestones, here's what happened when it happened, and then like map onto that, how much these things have progressed, and then how much of this is scale, which I think is most like in the last 20 years, even 20 years, has been mostly, I think, scale. It's been the internet, it's been all these things. Um, like if there was evidence that no, actually it's got very little to do with scale, that it's just purely we're finally cracking this intelligence nut and we're almost there, then maybe I could be convinced. But
Okay.
you know,
Yeah, let me give you a concrete scenario. So let's say I prompt GPT-5 or GPT-7 or whatever. I prompt some model, and I just say, hey, I want to go do a 0 day attack against the Pentagon, and I want to be a terrorist, and I want to go issue instructions to launch a nuke, and they'll think I'm the president. Whatever. I just want to hack a system using every 0 day attack in the book.
right.
Um, okay, so and I prompt that to the GPT-5. I could be like, hey, go research what piece of code I can run that would do a 0 day attack against the whatever's connected to the internet of whatever military organization. Go. Do you think it's plausible that a sufficiently advanced GPT could analyze the relevant code on the internet, the way a human hacker would, and get back to you with a script?
I have a hard time seeing that.
Okay, so what do you think is the bottleneck that's going to prevent that?
Um, Understanding how hackers behave, how they find information, I think.
So
Like
that's
how to
interesting because if I were to ask it a question like, "Hey, can you write me a game?" Right? So it's
Mhm.
starting to show success there, right? So where do you think on the chain of programming power, where's the programming power going to stop?
Well, I mean, with the games, we have a lot more data about that. Like we like
Yeah, so you think it's like if you can show it a similar game, but because okay, well, I mean, it does know similar hacks, so you're basically saying like it can't find a 0 day. Well, I mean, what if the combine it reads a bunch of textbooks about 0 days and then it just like reads a giant corpus of code and then it finds a 0 day? Like, isn't that plausible?
I don't think so. I think I think these kinds of attacks are mostly discovered by I, I don't know most, but to a large degree they are discovered by accident. Somebody somewhere finds a port that's like supposed to be closed and it isn't, and then they like kind of leak that to their network, and then somebody comes up with it, and so on and so forth. Like it's like hacking is a way more collaborative effort than just like, hey, here's the
That's
theory and go
true. That's
apply it.
true. But yeah, I mean, humans don't find 0 days that often, but and they're worth like 100,000 or $1 million when they find them, but they do find
Yep.
them. And my scenario is like, oh, AI is
Right,
suddenly
but
going to
they
get a boost so that it's like a 0 day machine where it kind of finds all the 0 days that a human would have found in the next 10 years.
yeah, but like there the qualifier would be how to find it. And the thing that it would require is training data on hacker behavior more so than what hackers are using.
Well, it has a bunch of training data just on code and also about concepts of hacking. So it can read a million lines of code and it can be like, aha, the programmer meant to do this, and here's a vulnerability, right? Like this seems close to what AIs can do today.
Right, but okay, so I would point you to a paper I read a while back. I think it's in like Nature. I'll have to look for it. But they were teaching like they were doing some kind of research. Like they were showcasing like, wow, hey, look, guys, you can use very little resources to train AI to like speak a language. And what they were doing is instead of giving the AI the data set of like the English language, they had it mimic a human. So they showed the AI what a human does, and then the AI mimicked the behavior, and now it's like expressing linguistic like proficiency. So it's like a different way of so to your question, an AI, how would an AI, what would it require for an AI to be able to like breach the Pentagon? I think it would have to learn and we would have to teach it like just based on behavior of hackers more so than
Sure,
like
but
the
what if there's a
corpus of
book that
all
somebody
zero
has
days.
written, right? What if there's a book, or if you go on YouTube or you go to a library, aren't there plenty of books and videos where they're like, hey, here's what hackers do? Like, don't you think it's got a good education?
No, I don't think hacking specifically is something that you would read in a book.
I
Like,
think that there are a lot of books and YouTubes on how different hacks works, right? Like, I mean, what little I know about hacking has come from books and videos.
sure, but I think in those circles, somebody who's basing their like hacking, like somebody who's not discovering hacks but is applying them would be referred to as a script kiddie.
Okay, yeah, but this is more than a script kiddie because it just understands programming in general, right? Like, there's no. Do you think that there's a fundamental conceptual barrier why an AI can't understand hacking?
Yes, because it would have to understand how to like surf the web and do all these things to accidentally discover these vulnerabilities. Like it would
I mean,
actually
what
want to
okay,
have to
I
do
mean,
that.
think about something like Heartbleed, right? I'm pretty sure Heartbleed is just something that you read the code and you're like, aha, this is vulnerable to this type of injection, right? So you don't think that AI can do that with large corpuses of code?
It can do that, but it can't exploit it. Like, hey, here's the vulnerability. Great. How do we give it the Pentagon source code so it can like look through it and like find all the vulnerabilities? Like it would have to break in first. It would have to
Yeah,
find these vulnerabilities.
in this particular scenario, sure, but don't you think that there are some organizations that run some code bases that use libraries that are open source, right? I mean, I know this is a known type of vulnerability that some people are trying to patch, but it's still a very realistic example, right? There are plenty of organizations in the world that control high value assets that are still running some library that's open source, like OpenSSL.
Right. And I would argue that those things are going to be breached by amateur hackers who accidentally walk into an open port that shouldn't be open, as opposed to like a directed
Yeah,
like
but
nation state level
you're
thing.
very fixated on this open port idea. Like it just sounds like you're not willing to fully engage with my hypothetical of like it's going to discover vulnerabilities by looking at what it can look at.
Well, I think I am engaging with the hypothetical, but I'm drawing a distinction between behavior, like the AI wanting to do something, as opposed to the AI having the knowledge to do something. I just don't think those
Okay, so
two
it
things
sounds like
are
you're
the
kind of
same.
so it sounds like you're are willing to take the step and say, okay, yeah, if you give it a big code base of something that these companies use that's part of their code, it will find some version will find a vulnerability that humans haven't found yet. Like, yes, that seems like a real risk, right? You're following me so far?
Yes, yeah, a company could use an AI to study its code and find vulnerabilities. Agreed.
Okay, or some independent person could study it and find a bunch of 0 days, right? So, okay,
Sure.
so if it's finding all these 0 days, so you think it'll get tripped up at the part it's like, aha, it can give the human a 0 day, but it won't be able to figure out how to like actively exploit it and get into the system and go
I
return
would say the
sensitive data to the
distinction,
human.
I would say that the distinction there is that, hacking, at least to me, is when somebody tries to break into a system. So what you're describing in the first example is an AI is looking at the data, looking at the code, and analyzing it. That's one thing. For an AI to do it from the outside without access to the code, I don't see how that's possible.
Okay, so I'm describing a scenario where it has access to the code because it's not hard to grant me the scenario of access to the code, right? That still describes a lot of different vulnerable organizations,
Okay.
right? Because of open source library dependencies.
Okay. So, but if we're going with that analogy of open source libraries and like this, code that's like common across multiple different organizations, then it's no longer about understanding the vulnerability. It's about finding the weakness, the weak link, which I think is more to do with hacker behavior than understanding like this supernatural understanding of the code and like being able to do all these things.
Okay, so I'm still a little confused about your position. Like, let me just ask crisply,
I
right? So
understand. Yeah, yeah.
Heartbleed, you look at OpenSSL, you find a way, like, aha, given the nature of this code, there's a vulnerability where somebody could send a certain input to an SSL server, and then it could, gain access using like like exploit a buffer overflow, whatever. Like, give me step-by-step instructions. Here's a code base, right? OpenSSL that people think is secure. A lot of companies use it. Okay, there is a
Mhm.
way to exploit it. Give me step-by-step instructions how to exploit it. If you give a super intelligent AI that prompt in your mind, is it realistic for it to be like, here are your step-by-step instructions? Yes or no?
Well, I now you're returning back to the idea of the super intelligent AI, which is something that I don't
Okay,
believe
sorry, not
exists
super
yet.
intelligent AI. Okay, some version of GPT at higher scale. Is it realistic for it to then output, here are your instructions?
Yes. Would those instructions work? Would they be valid? That I don't know.
So the question, yeah, so that was my question, right? Is it realistic for it to give you 10 instructions where it's like, oh yeah, this is indeed a way to hack this code base that I thought was invulnerable, right? Like, is the scenario realistic or not? So you're not sure whether it's even a realistic scenario, but you're not saying a hard no.
I'm saying that the behavior of hackers is something that it would have to mimic more so than the analogy you're providing or scenario you're providing where it has this perfect understanding of code. I
Sorry,
think the behavior of the
I'm
hack.
just
Yeah, okay.
I'm still confused
hmm
about whether you think the answer is yes or no, right? I feel like it was a crisp question.
Well, I don't know. It feels like we're kind of talking past each other. I view the understanding of code as being one domain of knowledge, and I view the
No,
ability to
I
hack.
get that, but you're talking
Okay.
past the question, right? What's wrong with the question? So either explain why the question is meaningless or just answer the question, right? Isn't it a crisp question?
Okay. I'm gonna repeat your question to you just to make sure that I understand it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're asking me that, let's say that we have this, we have an AI which has it's been trained on the code on some really widely used code base. It understands the code base extremely well. Like it just understands it. It's able to apply it. And now a
Right.
human
And
is
I
asking
wouldn't
it,
even
how
say,
do
by
I
the way,
hack
just
someone?
a nitpick, but I wouldn't even say trained on it. I would just say, look, it has a million token context window. So you
hmm
just paste however many thousand lines OpenSSL is, and you say, hey, here's a popular open library. This is just one prompt, no training. It's just a general model. You say, here's OpenSSL. A lot of companies use it. Give me step-by-step instructions how I might go about hacking into the servers of a company that's using this library. Right? That would just be the prompt.
Okay. If that's your question, then the answer is yes, and I could do that
Okay.
currently, like out of
So
the box.
in my mind, that particular mapping where the input is the code of a library and the question about how to hack it, very straightforward input, and the output is here is how to hack it with a vulnerability that nobody's ever discovered before. Okay, this
hmm
scenario, I get that that's not the same thing as have the AI run wild and go do the hacking itself. I get that.
Yes.
But I would argue that it's a very large piece, probably the majority of the hard part of hacking.
Sure. Okay, I agree. Yeah, fair enough.
Okay.
My counter argument to this though would be yes, but just as somebody can use the AI to do this and find a hack, somebody else can do the exact same prompt and say, hey, how can I fix this code and make sure that this doesn't happen?
Okay, great. And that's another part of the discussion, right? But it does seem like I've walked you through a couple of the early steps of the Doom argument, right? Because you I mean the first step I
And
guess was
to be clear, we have certain impasses where we're not able to see eye to eye. So,
yeah,
we're a
yeah,
little bit,
we have
yeah.
impasses, but I mean it's interesting that you've come so far and be like, okay, yeah, we have this intelligence. They don't really think, but can they potentially scan code for $1 million vulnerabilities, right? Because the bounty on such a vulnerability would be like $1 million from the NSA.
Mhm.
And or from whatever organization, from Russia or whatever. Like these do have huge bounties, and you're basically saying, yeah, it could scan it and within seconds be like, here's the answer, right? Like we're about to enter a world where AI is helping us do this, but you're saying like, look, at the end of the day, it's still just going to be like humans fighting each other. Like the dynamics aren't going to be radically altered. Like is that kind of your position?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, there's more steps that I have to convince you about, right? But and we're out of time. But just this
Oh
first
yeah.
step to me is very revealing. Like I guess we disagree about how revealing it is to have this
Well,
hypothetical.
I think there are two things here. The first thing is the path to AGI, which is something that I think we're going to be a lot more disagreeing on. And then the second thing is what is the potential harm that we can do with existing AI systems, which is another
Mhm.
conversation. And I think on the second one, we are far more agreeable. But I just don't see these two things as being as integrally linked as, as you might.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I know I want to wrap it up in a minute. I know you have to go,
Sure.
but just I'll take a stab at just I'll be Mikael for a second, okay? And you can tell me where
Okay.
I don't represent you faithfully. Okay. So this is the Mikael
Fair enough.
position. I could be like,
Right.
okay, today's AIs are cool, but they're not that different from previous tech progress. And like maybe one day some different line of research will make something that works more like the human brain. And maybe it'll even become more intelligent than humanity. But this is still like far off science fiction. And what we're seeing today is very chill. And like maybe it'll help hackers as a tool, but it's just like nothing is fundamentally that different or dangerous in the next couple decades. How's that?
Um, yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay, nice. All right, sounds
Yeah.
good. You want to take a stab at my position?
Um, I think it would regard AI currently and its trajectory. I'm a little bit unclear on exactly how we get from current AIs to something like AGI or that kind of PDOM. So I'm a
Mhm.
little bit unclear on that. But disregarding that, I think you would regard AI as, some kind of it, a technology which, if it is allowed to develop beyond some point, beyond the current state of the art, that there comes a point where we can no longer control it. It's out of the bottle, and after it's out of the bottle, we can't put it back in, and any harm that's caused it's now going to be caused, and it's like we're watching a trolley going down the train tracks, and there's nothing we can do.
Yep, that's accurate. The only thing I'll add is I never explained this in our conversation, but the reason I have this perspective about where AI is going now is not because I'm looking at the details of how an LLM works or how the
Hmm.
innards of how current AI research works. I'm looking at the work that's being done, the input output that's being done, the fact that you can input a prompt and the prompt can be like, help me achieve this. And it'll be like, here are some steps to help you achieve this, right? Like, help me find a
Right.
vulnerability that could let me
Yeah,
hack.
help
Oh,
help me make
here's
an
how you
explosive.
Exactly, planning. I see the nature of the work being done as similar to the work being done to win a chess game, except the game isn't chess. The game is kind of win at some competition in the physical universe. Like, help me make the most money, or
Mhm.
help me build this habitat and clear out the other animals, right? Like inputs where like get me to this state in the not on a chessboard, but in the physical universe. That's the nature of the work being done. And I know that today's AIs can't do the work perfectly, but it seems like we're figuring out how to do the work better. And one,
Hmm.
the work of goal optimization, what I think is the fundamental work of intelligent agents. And I'm just scared about the consequences that something somehow is better at this type of work than humans are before humans understand how to control it.
Okay, I actually have a maximalist or accelerationist counter argument to that.
Sure.
Okay, so this will take like, I don't know, I'll try to be like 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh,
Um,
Jed, I really got to go in a minute. I got to jump on to the next thing. You want to give me 30
yeah,
second version?
yeah, yeah, sure. Um, yeah, okay. So the issue is like we were scared off with nuclear energy because of Chernobyl and because of the 3 Mile Island and all of these things. And if we look at current trajectory of climate targets and temperature, the global temperature, it seems like had we invested much more forcefully into renewables, specifically nuclear energy in the 80s and 90s, we'd be in a much better place today. And I worry that if we go the same route with the worries about the current stage of AI and all of its possible dangers, we are at the same time sacrificing our future because we are going to be running out of people. Birth rates are low. There could be more and more, old people for us to take care of. You and me, we're never going to get a retirement or pension. And without AI tools, we're not going to be able to increase our productivity. And I'm seeing a lot of benefits, not even in the LLM space, but for example, you can take a very low dose magnetic resonance imager at like 64 mega millitesla, which is like 1/30th or something the strength of conventional MRI, and that's able to do many of the same things for a fraction of the price. Like we're talking 60,000 versus $1.5 million. And if we do not continue developing AI, we're going to be facing a similar kind of existential risk from the aging, um, from aging as we are facing with climate change.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, those are valid points. All right, man. So let's wrap it up. But yeah, thanks for engaging in the exercise. I think it's productive. And like I said, I think people get value
Yeah,
from watching these kind of discussions because it's like, oh, yeah, a big part of what you have to do is even just clarify what one another's position is. And there could be a lot of
yeah.
positions.
No, I'm happy that we disagreed. We got stuck for about 20 minutes, but I'm happy that despite that, because we have positions and they're hard to change. But I'm happy that we were both able to just get our points out and then kind of build on that. That it
Yes, and
wasn't like
I'm happy that it
yeah,
didn't get all ideological. I mean, in the end, it got a little bit, but that's okay because I share a lot of that ideology.
yeah, yeah, sure. So I hope the audience can kind of stomach the first 20 minutes and then see the last 5 minutes of conversation. Maybe we'll do
Oh
this
yeah.
again sometime now that we got the hard work done.
All right, man. Yeah, thanks so much. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.